Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another chapter of Experiencer Interviews. And today we've got a lovely soul that comes us from down under. Her name's Cheryl Gottschall. Cheryl has had a lifelong interest in the paranormal, which began in her teenage years. But in 1980, she began seriously studying the phenomenon of near-death experiences. Soon after, she joined the International Association for Near-Death Studies. In 1995, hosted Dr. Ken Ring for the Brisbane leg of his Australian tour, where he presented research for his future book, Mindsight, Near-Death and Out-of-Body Experiences in the Blind. She also developed a deep interest in the UFO phenomenon, catalyzed by her father-in-law's interest after he attended a meeting hosting George Adamski in the 1960s. In 1988, she joined the Brisbane-based association UFO Research Queensland, and 3 years later took on the role of president. Then in 1992, Cheryl and her late husband, Dr. Martin Gottschall, established the first Close Encounter support group in Brisbane after Bud Hopkins' Australian tour. Dr. Ring's book, The Omega Project, Near-Death Experiences, UFO Encounters, and the Mind at Large, ignited Cheryl's interest in the connections between UFOs and NDEs, which she was now being corroborated by the witnesses she was interviewing. Cheryl has had many paranormal experiences, herself including an NDE, a bilocation experience, out-of-body experiences, UFO sightings, a close encounter with non-human intelligences, poltergeist activity, automatic writing, and other unexplained phenomena, all of which propel her to continue on her quest to understand what it means to be human. Cheryl's research bridges the afterlife and UFO subjects, and wanting to understand the UFO phenomenon more deeply led her to train into shamanism, which she now teaches. She speaks regularly about the UFO phenomenon and the afterlife at public meetings, conferences, community groups, schools, libraries, and has given hundreds of media interviews. She has written articles for many UFO and New Age magazines, and in 2018 was a regular guest on the weekly Spooky Action radio show and co-hosted the Strange Encounters Down Under radio show in 2019. Currently, she's a regular writer for the UFO Research Queensland bi-monthly publication UFO Encounter, and she works as a clinical hypnotherapist, teaches Reiki, art therapy, and shamanism. So, thanks so much for coming on, Cheryl.
Well, thanks for having me, Yannick.
So, well, you've been quite active in the field now, but to start off, when did your experiences actually start? Did it start off as a child? Did you see anything?
Well, as a child, I would always be outside looking at the stars and wondering if there were other beings out there, looking back at planet Earth, wondering if there were other beings out there. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why, because my family, that was not in their worldview at that time at all. But I was always fascinated with everything from space. But then when I was a teenager and I started to do some work and I could get a little bit of my own money, I was buying a magazine and which had all paranormal experiences in it. So that sort of, catapulted my interest and moved it on, I suppose. But the experiences that I've had actually started. I joined UFO Research Queensland in 1988. So I'm just saying that because my experiences didn't didn't catapult me into joining the group. I joined UFO Research Queensland, and then in the early 90s, I had a close encounter experience myself, and a near-death experience in 1996, I think it was, and various other paranormal experiences. So that all started for me in my 20s.
Okay. Now let's get into your experiences. Were the NDEs that happened to you? Well, how many NDEs did you have? One?
Just one NDE.
Just one. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank God.
And I had a fairly significant out-of-body experience too. But with the near-death experience, it was 1990 or 91. I can never quite remember exactly which year. Anyway, because I have to say I don't remember the year because for 15 years I told myself it was a hallucination. That's why. Oh. I sort of really struggled with it because One, I was a UFO researcher, and I didn't want people to think that hanging around with people who were reporting abduction experiences and close encounters was having its effect on me. Well, who knows? It could have. I don't know. But I don't, now these days, I don't think that. But then I was a bit concerned about that. Anyway, I woke up in the early hours of the morning, and the bedroom window was on my side of the bed. There was only about a metre between me, the bed, and the window. And in that space, I saw three small beings. And they were typical grey aliens, except they were dark because they were silhouetted by the street light out on the footpath. So I couldn't really see their faces. But I have a memory of seeing their eyes. And so that's one of those strange situations where you've got two different memories, but you can't quite reconcile how that can be. Anyway, the memory I have is of their eyes, which are the big dark wraparound eyes. And but they were standing there, and they were only very short. They wouldn't have been more than probably about 4 feet tall, and they were quite emaciated looking. And I'm not a person to shirk from pouncing on someone physically if to protect other people or myself. So if necessary, that is, I don't go around beating people up. But if I had to, I would. And so this is something that sort of I wondered about, like, why didn't I just get up and, hit them away or something like that? I could have. But anyway, so I did a very strange thing. First of all, I was terrified. I was terror struck. I really came to understand what that word meant at the time. The next thing I did unconsciously was pull the sheet up over my head and started saying the Lord's Prayer. And I don't know why, but the next thing I remember is waking up in the morning and having no memory of what had transpired the night before. And until about lunchtime, or just after lunch the next day, and something triggered my memory, and I remembered what had happened. Now, and I sort of went, whoa, what was that all about? Anyway, my ex-husband, he was asleep in the bed next to me, and he suffered from insomnia. So in those days, we would still have the milkman who could be a block away and, rattling milk bottles, and my husband would wake up. Well, he didn't stir the whole night. And I guess that's one of those things that we often hear, isn't it, where partners of people having these experiences are sort of just out to it.
Yeah.
Anyway, for a long time, I sat on that story, and I've never dug around to have hypnotic regression or anything like that, because I'm a hypnotherapist myself, and I know that when you unleash the unconscious mind, you unleash a lot of creativity. And I didn't want to sort of colour my memory of the experience with anything else that my unconscious might like to fill in with the gaps, So, and I've just left it on the shelf. So that was that particular experience. And then I became quite ill, which is interesting. That happened in 1990, 91. By 1992, I was quite ill. And that illness lasted for 10 years. And in 1996, I had a near-death experience. And I'd been ill for 10 years with a serious chronic illness, and there were 3 years of acute illness, to the point where I couldn't walk to the bathroom to wash myself or anything like that. My husband had to carry me for a while there. Anyway, I'd been to traditional doctors and to alternative therapists, naturopaths, homeopaths, you name it, I'd been there. Nothing was working, and in a last-ditch effort, a friend of mine took me to a hands-on healer. I had a session with that person, came home, and that was it. I laid down on the couch. He said, will you be all right if I leave you here? And I said, I'm fine, because my husband will be home in about 10 minutes. I'll be fine. And he left, and I was in the house by myself, laying on the sofa. And then something interesting happened. Something like a very malleable ice cream cone on its side emerged from the wall of the lounge room. And it sort of came across like this, and it opened up like that. and it was about 6 feet across in diameter, and it was swirling. So it was a big circle like this, but it narrowed down to a funnel. And I guess you could say it was a tunnel. Anyway, I separated from my body because it had started to draw me in with this very strong, what felt like a gravitational force. And I wasn't going. And the non-physical part of me had sort of grabbed onto the back of the couch, and I'm straining not to be pulled into it, and my physical body's just lying there. And again, I was terror-struck. It was the same sense of terror that I'd had when I'd had this close encounter experience, and I knew it was malevolent. I knew that if I went there, it would not be a good thing. It wasn't just about knowing that you wouldn't come back. It was a real sense of malevolence, and that was the same experience I had with the close encounter. There was a really strong sense of malevolence, and I think that was what triggered the feelings of terror in me. And yet there was nothing going on. It was like another sense, my sixth sense said, this is not good, you know. So anyway, what happened then was, while I'm struggling with this, not wanting to be dragged off into goodness knows where, something like a ticker tape went through my mind. You know, the old ticker tapes with the information on that would come out of the old machines during the wartime. I think they call it a ticker tape machine or something. Anyway, very long, thin paper message. And my daughter's name was on it, strangely enough.
Wow.
And as soon as I saw that, everything stopped. Everything just completely disappeared and went back to normal. My husband walked in, and that was that. So that was, you know, it wasn't a full-blown near-death experience, but it was a connection with something that was very. Actually, I don't even know what it was, Yannick, to tell you the truth. It's very strange. Yeah.
Well, you made me think of something that you said that again, like NDEs and ETs sometimes are interrelated, and I can't remember who I interviewed, but this person had an NDE. He died, and he was expecting like to see Jesus or God, but like I think beside the white light or what, he met a gray. And the gray spoke to him and sent him back because it wasn't his time. So that was pretty fascinating for me.
Yes. Well, I've spoken to a couple of people like that. And one was a woman who I came in, well, I'd known her for some years, but I hadn't seen her for a long time. And she had been coming to our UFO meetings. And anyway, when I started the Afterlife group, she came to that as well. And she told the story of when she would be in her 60s now. So when she was 12 years old, so we're going back 50 years, she was having surgery and the anaesthetic was confused somehow, and she couldn't breathe when she was unconscious. They weren't giving her enough oxygen and too much of something else. Anyway, so she left her body, and she said she'd had a near-death experience. She left her body and she began going down a tunnel, which is a lot of people hear about in near-death experiences, but not always. And she was sort of lined up with streams of people going in this along in this tunnel. But there was also toward the light, but there was also a stream of people coming back from the light in the opposite direction. And in that stream of people she said she was looking at all the people going past her, going the opposite direction. And she saw this small being who she said he looked like there was something wrong with him. And she was, as a child, she was feeling very sorry for this being that looked quite deformed. Anyway, sometime later, apparently, she walked into one of our UFO meetings, and someone was talking about alien abduction experiences. And on the screen was an image of a grey. And she said, that is exactly what I saw in that coming back from the light in her near-death experience. So that's a really interesting story for me, but it's not the only one that I've heard. Because another one was, and this one I'd put on the shelf. I heard this I was told this back in 95, when I had bought a property to open a new age centre, and one night I had a night about near-death experiences because I had a long time interest in it. And I'd invited a woman to come and speak, and she brought a friend. And the friend later told me that when her daughter was young, her daughter died. And she'd been to the funeral that day, and she came home, and she was quite bereft because of the death of her daughter. And she laid down on her bed, and she said she could feel her heartbeat slowing. And the next thing she knows, she's left her body. And she's walking along this sort of windy path with the soul of her daughter. And she gets to the point of no return where she's met by some type of spirit being, and the spirit being says to her, "You can't go any further, and I'll take your daughter now." So, she hands the daughter over to the spirit being. This is a very short version. And then she returns along the path. But as she does, she sees a UFO. Somehow she enters the UFO. I can't quite remember the full details now. And she finds herself laying on some type of table. Now, remember, this is in her out-of-body state, right? And it's quite curious. And they do some sort of examination on her, not necessarily, I think, physical, but she laid down on this table, and they're sort of, giving her the once-over. And then she gets up, and she leaves the UFO, and she walks back down this windy path and wakes up on a bed. So these are two stories of people having some sort of alien contact or seeing them, and that's not the only ones, while they're in an out-of-body state. And, of course, that gets me to think, well, what on earth does that mean? Can extraterrestrials, and let's just call them that for now, can they traverse another dimension that we refer to as the afterlife, or in another state of consciousness, or do they populate that particular realm? We don't really know. So it's a very big question, and I think for a long time UFO researchers have really underestimated the size and the vastness of the phenomenon, and how much human beings can be intertwined.
What took you to the intersecting, once you got involved in both, intersecting the UFOs with the near-death experiences?
Yeah, sure. Well, actually, when Dr. Ken Ring was touring here, I hosted him twice, actually. Twice? Oh, no.
And can you explain who Dr. Ken Ring is for anybody who might not know?
Ken Ring is one of the co-founders of the International Association of Near-Death Studies over in the States. He's getting on in years now, but I think he was touring here when he was in his late 50s or something. It was in 1996, I think it was. And he's done a lot of research into near-death experiences, but the crossover was when I got to know him. I looked into other things that he had written, and his book, The Omega Project, UFOs, NDEs and Mind at Large, really captured my interest. And anyway, soon after that, I had opened a Centre for Growth and Personal Development, a little bit alternative, and I hosted an evening about near-death experiences, and a woman came along who told me about her experience. And she had lost a child, and she was very distraught. She'd been to the funeral. She came home, she laid down on a bed, and she could feel her heart rate slowing and getting very, very low. The next thing she knew, she was out of her body. She was walking with the soul of her deceased daughter along this windy path, got to the point of no return, where she was met by a spirit being. And the spirit being said, "You can't come past here, but I'll take your daughter now." And so with much angst, she handed her daughter over to the spirit being, and the spirit being, she's fine, I'll look after her. So as she was walking back, coming back on this winding path, she described seeing a classic spaceship. And the next thing she knows, she's inside the spaceship and she is having some sort of examination. Now, remember, this is in an out-of-body state, okay, which was the first time I'd ever heard anything like that. And then she was released. She left the ship, went back, and next thing to know, she's waking up on her bed. So that really, I didn't know what to do with that because no one was talking about those types of cases in the mid-90s. So I just put it on the shelf for a very long time. But then I met other people. And one was the case of a woman who spoke to my Afterlife group actually a couple of years ago. And when she was in her 60s then, but when she was 12, she had problems with her tonsils, so that she went into surgery, had them removed. And the anesthesiologist had somehow mixed up the drugs that they were giving her, and she couldn't breathe. So she basically died on the table. Then she left her body and she found herself traveling through a long tunnel with streams of people going in, following in a line, going towards a light at the end of this tunnel. But the interesting thing with her experience was there was also a stream of people coming back from the light. And in that stream of people was this little person who she thought was a deformed child at the time. And she remembers thinking, oh, the poor little thing, I feel so sorry for it, because it looked very emaciated, very skinny, in amongst all these humans. Anyway, years later, when she tracked down UFO Research Queensland, she came to our meeting. She walked in the door, and at the time someone was talking about these grey aliens, and she looked up on the screen and she saw one of these grey aliens. And she said to me later, I walked in there, I saw that, and she said that was exactly what I had seen during my near-death experience when I was 12, which really is a Pandora's box when you think about that. First of all, there's, people coming back from this stream of light and an alien in there, or what looked like an alien to her, a grey alien. I mean, what do you do with that, right?
Questions everything we really know about the afterlife and what we're told. Even classic Western near-death experience stories, none of them include stories of aliens. And I think what you're saying is so groundbreaking, because I'd love to hear. It's so interesting. It really is. I've never heard these experiences, and they're awesome, because it really makes me think, what is this afterlife that we experience? Why do we reincarnate if we do? And what's up with that? You know what I mean? Like, what are your thoughts? Like,
yeah, well, from my own interest, I'm very interested in how the possibility of extraterrestrials might be involved in our soul evolution, or are they just sort of intermingled with it, or because there's a couple of other cases too, where there was a woman who was, it was back in the late 80s, maybe, can't quite remember, but she was she and her husband had gone on a trip. They were doing fossicking for gems, and the car broke down. They had to find a place to stay. They found like a caravan park, and it had these tents already set up. So they booked one of those. They stayed the night till they could get the car fixed the next day. That night, she's laying inside the tent, and the flaps pull back, and she's looking up at the sky, and she sees this object appear, a very bright light, and out of it comes these crisscross boomerang-shaped things, and they're flying out of this larger craft, what looks like a larger light. And she thought, gosh, what's that? And the next thing she knows, she's in this different scene. And in the scene, she's standing there, and what could you say? A vehicle with no roof on it, but very sleek and ovoid shape, with a seating in the front and a seating in the back, with four beings in there, human looking, very attractive, and one of them's holding a child. And it pulls up in front of her, and they communicate to her that this child that they're holding is the soul of her unborn son. Of course, she wanted to hold it. And there was interaction and all sorts of things going on. But the point is that they told her, this is the soul of an unborn son. And she looked at the child, beautiful child, gives the child back. Also, there was she was sprayed down before they gave her the child with something that could have been antibacterial, who knows, or antiviral. Gives the child back and then wakes up in the tent, or comes to normal consciousness in the tent, and thought to herself, well, if there are UFOs, I've just seen them. I've seen one, and I don't know who these beings were. And when later on, when she had a child, it was exactly the same child, looked exactly the same as what she was shown in that experience. So it makes me wonder, like, again, how are they involved in that sort of process?
Yeah, it makes me question, are they in the same dimension? Do they control the dimension? Or can they just access that dimension if they need to? And then on a deeper level, are they in control of our souls on some nefarious level? Or are they in control of our souls on a benevolent level? Or just seeing our soul progression? So to take us out of our, maybe if you look at humanity, we're in like very warlike ways. And, you know, we're always in war and conflict, you know, so maybe we need to spiritually evolve, and maybe they're here for that. So I know there's a lot to unpack in what I just said, but what are your thoughts?
Well, first of all, let me just back that up a bit, because, you know, you raised the question of, you know, are they malevolent or benevolent? And there could be a wide variety of beings that populate out our unseen realms, as are in various traditions. And some of those may be benevolent and some of them may be malevolent, because some of them present themselves as angels and others don't. And there is a history of a tradition of beings that protect us after we die, as our soul travels along the path, the Death Walker's path, where to make sure that we actually get to where we need to go after we die. So there's various stories like that in different traditions too. So it's hard to say. It really is hard to say.